Good morning, good morning, good morning. And thank you so much for joining me for the podcast of the True Power from Within. I do pray each and every day that this podcast touches you in the most amazing and encouraging way. So I've put a name to this podcast, but I think that it's probably going to change as I go through the podcast. So first of all, I want to tell you a quick story, and then we are going to go into the word. And I'm going to come out of Hebrews 11 today. So I'm writing my second book. All right. And my first book was just about my story, right? About my past and some encouragement and some ideas of people who are in addiction, right? It's kind of a reference point for family of people who, have, addiction in their family, but they've never been an addict themselves. And so they don't really understand how the mind of an addict works, right? And the point of, when you become an addict, you don't wake up one day and say, hey, today's the day I'm just going to become an addict and destroy my life. It comes with lots of different things happening in your life, and it leads you to that point, right? So it was kind of when I wrote that book. I'm going to kind of go back a little bit. So when I began to really try to gain a relationship with God, right? I had started going downtown. With my he wasn't my husband at that time, but who is my husband now. And I was beginning to hear a word of grace and mercy that I had never heard before, right? I had never heard that part of the Bible, right? I had never heard that God offers so much grace and so much mercy, and that we'll fall 7 times 7. So, we'll fall, but the point is to get back up. The point is continue your race. The point is, no matter if you're walking or you're crawling or you're running, just to keep fighting and keep going. And God will, give you the grace and the mercy that you need along the way. And so I didn't know that. But when I really started to really want to open up and find that relationship with God and really build that relationship, it didn't start off strong, right? But I was looking for other pastors, right? I gravitated to women pastors. And I, at that point was terrified to share my story, right? I was terrified because I was ashamed and I was guilty. I felt so guilty. And I was like, people are going to judge me. And, I was still kind of in the mentality of like, everything I did, I'm a bad person. Like, I don't want to tell people about my past because of course it's dirty and it's messy. And people are going to talk about me and they're going to judge me. But I found Sarah Jakes Roberts, right? And I was listening to her, and I just happened to come across a YouTube video about her story. And, as I'm listening to her story, I'm listening from a girl who got pregnant as a teenager, right? And I can't help to think that, her husband not her husband, but her father is a big time pastor, right? And the thing is like, she says that I'm grateful that I became pregnant before social media, right? Because our world would have destroyed her, right? And she was terrified to share her story at the beginning, but she said that her father had asked her to come to one of his conferences and tell her story. And she said, I didn't do it for other people. I did it for me because I was tormented by my past. I was terrified to share my story. I was terrified to tell the world that I was pregnant as a teenager. She said, I was tormented by my past. And it really got me to thinking. And at that moment, I wasn't open, right? I wasn't open to sharing my story. I wasn't open to letting people into what had happened or what I had done, or that I was an addict, or I had a convicted felon or a bad mom. Like, I was not in that place yet. But when I heard her share her story, it somewhat opened up a door for me, because I was like, if this woman whose dad has every eyes in the world on him, right? And we know that pastors' family should be perfect. And, that's the eyes of what the world sees. Like, if you're a pastor, you've got to act a certain way, your family's got to be a certain way, you have to talk a certain way, you have to dress a certain way. Like we have all of these standards for pastors, right? And then of course their families as well. But it opened up a door for me, because I saw that not only was she willing to share her story, right? Because she was tired of being tormented by her past, which I think a lot of us do that. We're so tormented by our past that we build up these walls, right? We build up these walls because we say, they're going to judge me, or I'm not good enough for this. I don't have purpose. I have been through so much, and I'm going to choose to be bitter. I'm going to choose to be angry because, this person, traumatized me, or I was abused, or I was an addict, or all of this. And we choose to allow that to torment us, instead of allowing God to use those things that we went through to produce a purpose within our lives. And when I wrote my first book, I didn't write my first book for the world, right? I didn't write my first book with the intention of it being a bestseller. Okay. I didn't write that for the world. Am I grateful that everybody who has wanted to support me in buying my book? Am I grateful that people want to read my book and they want to hear my story? Absolutely. I'm so grateful for that. But as Sarah Jakes Roberts, I also was tormented by my past. I also was full of shame. I was full of guilt. I was full of so many things, and the fear of judgment just loomed over me every single day. And I wrote that first book because I wanted to stop living in a cage of my past. I wanted to get my story on paper. I wanted to publish it, okay? Because to me, that was my ability to get my story out and stop being fearful and tormented by it. Now, if it has helped people, I'm grateful. But it was a freeing moment for me when I pushed, and I self-published, when I pushed that publish button, okay? When I pushed that button, it was a sense of freedom and release for me. Because now I didn't have a choice, right? The world, my story was in the world, and anybody could read it. But as I'm writing this second book, and I have started a lot of different books, right? But I always lost the drive, right? And I always thought that I had to have a name for my book before I started, because the title would be the subject of what it's based on, right? But this one was a little different. God says, just write, just start writing, right? So I started writing. And when you're writing, and you're writing a book about yourself or your story. Now, this is not my story, like my past story. This is the messy comeback story of my relationship with God, right? This is a book solely based on how my relationship with God started and how it has grown and flourished, right? To not yet being exactly where I want to be, but in a journey of becoming. It's a constant state of becoming every day. So this is the messy comeback story of my relationship with God. So as I'm writing this, it's bringing up different things, right? It's bringing up, and I pray to God, I'm like, God, give me the creative mentality to write this, right? Give me the words, give me the stories, because sometimes a lot of our stories, even though we've been through them, certain situations, we kind of just block those out, right? And God's bringing up a lot of different things of, well, this is your story about your relationship with me. So let me bring up some things that you may have forgot, so that you can write about those. So, I remember very, very clearly um, one day when I was in prison, and I think I've told this on a podcast before, but this is really, um, I relate myself to a lot of women in the Bible. Okay, but this is my Sarah moment. We're going to call this my Sarah moment. So Abraham's wife Sarah, right? We know that when God said to her that you will bear a child, she laughed, right? So in one of my Bibles it says that Sarah says, I did not laugh, I'm just afraid. And God says, that is a lie, right? So, and it literally says that in one of my Bibles. And so we know that maybe she was afraid, but it was more so that she didn't have the faith, right? She didn't have the faith to know that God could bring something that looked impossible and make it possible, right? Because if we were in today's time and you're 89 and 99 or whatever it was, the ages that they were, we know in today's time that having a child or bearing a child is virtually impossible, right? Because as women, we go through menopause, we go through all of these things. So we know that it's pretty much impossible. But we know that God is a God of the impossible, right? God is a God that we can is when he begins to work in our life, we can no longer allow ourselves to be tormented by the past if we want him to use us in a much beautiful way. And it all goes back to having faith, right? But I can remember that back in the day when I listened to Sarah Jakes Roberts, or, back in the day when I was, trying to really get into the Bible and praying and all that, my faith was not that strong, right? Because I was still in a point of where I was still being tormented by my past, but yet I was still trying to create a relationship. So I was kind of in this gray area of faith, right? Like, okay, God, like I'll believe it when I see it, right? Okay, I'll pray to you about it. Can we make this happen? But yeah, if it doesn't, then I'm not going to be surprised, right? That was the kind of faith that I had in that moment, right? But one day when I was in prison, and I remember this so clearly, and I will never forget this, it was count time. Okay. If you're not familiar with count time, we have count time a couple of times a day, and it's where you have to stand up beside your bunk. You have to be quiet, and the guards come around and count and make sure that everybody's there, right? Everybody's accounted for. And we're standing up. It's in the afternoon. It's the whatever 4 or 5 o'clock count. I don't remember what time of the day it was, but it was in the afternoon. And I remember that I didn't want to be standing up. I didn't want to be doing this. You got to be quiet. I just, come out of all the classes, and, I was getting ready to go to work and all this stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to be doing this. But as I'm standing there and I'm being quiet, and remember that God speaks to you in those quiet moments, right? And, I was not a woman of faith. I was not a woman that I remember God spoke to me one time before that, right? And I thought it was because I was on drugs, and I thought I was crazy. But it happened the very next day, okay? So I knew that it was possible for God to speak to me. But in the moment, in count time, to have this crazy moment where God says to me, okay, this is the exact thing that he said to me, you will marry a pastor. That was my Sarah moment. That was my Sarah moment, because I laughed out loud to myself, because I said, that's the craziest thing I have ever heard in my whole life. Because in my life, pastors were perfect, okay, from what I knew. And there was no way that a perfect pastor was going to marry a crazy woman like me. Okay? Not an addict, not a convicted felon, not a bad mom, not somebody that didn't know the Bible from the beginning to the end, somebody that didn't know really how to pray, right? Somebody that didn't really have faith. Like, come on now. Like, does my life look like I'm going to marry a pastor? And so I had my Sarah moment. But when I got out of prison and I met this man on the job, I never, and I'm going to be honest, we see things through our eyes, right? We see things with our eyes and we think things, but we don't always have the faith to believe them, right? And so in this moment, I met this man, right? But I didn't know that he was a pastor. It was probably a month before I knew that he was a pastor. And we had conversations and all of that stuff, but I didn't know, right? But when I found out that he was a pastor, here was my thoughts. This is what we call our carnal thoughts, right? So the thought process that I had was this. I said, this man comes to work every day, Gucci'd out, right? Gucci hat, Gucci shirt, Gucci belt, Gucci shoes. All right. Here's me, right? Barely getting out of prison, wearing thrift store clothes, right? Don't have nothing to my name, right? I don't have no car. I am still living in a halfway house. I'm barely making enough money every week to survive in a normal atmosphere, right? I do not qualify for this, right? And so in my mind, I was like, this is not what's happening here, right? This is not what God was talking about. Like, I didn't have the faith to believe that that was it. And then as God started building the relationship, I was like, this is weird, right? But in Hebrews 11:11, right? Because I could sit here and tell stories all day. So in Hebrews 11:11, it says, by faith, even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, received power to conceive offspring, even though she was past the age. Okay? She considered the one who had promised was faithful. So here's what I want to tell you, because here's what I see in this passage. Even though we don't have a strong faith, okay? Even though our faith is weary, right? Our faith is messy, right? God will still give you power to produce seed in your life. Let me say that again. Even though your faith may be weary, okay? Your faith may not look like somebody else's, right? My husband's got 15 years of faith on me, all right? So my faith and his faith aren't always the same, okay? But we both have faith in our own way, right? We both learn and grow in faith in our own way. So your faith may not look like my faith. My husband's faith may not look like my faith. But the faith and to know that God's going to give you the strength to conceive seed in your life, right? So basically, to me, it's like God saying, go ahead, put me on trial, right? That I'm going to produce the promise that I said that I'm going to produce in your life, right? But what I love about Hebrews 11 is everything starts, right? It's stories of people who had to have faith even when it didn't look right, right? Even when it just didn't make sense, right? Even when they could have chose to be complacent or fearful or things just did not look normal. They had to have faith, right? So we see it says, by faith, Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was approved as a righteous man because God approved his gifts. Then we see, by faith, Enoch was taken away, and so he did not experience death. He was not to be found because God took him away. By faith, Noah, after he was warned about what was not yet seen, was motivated by godly fear to build an ark, right? By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed and set out for a place that he was going to receive as an inheritance. Okay, then we talk about Sarah in verse 11. And then it says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, right? And then you keep going, and it says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Moses, after he was born, was hidden by his parents for 3 months. By faith, he left Egypt behind, not being afraid of the king's anger. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down. Listen to me. By faith, you can stop allowing yourself to be tormented by your past. Okay? Your past doesn't look like everybody else's. Your past doesn't look like mine. My past doesn't look like yours. Your past is uniquely created to your life for a specific purpose. Okay? But by little faith, right? By God giving you the strength to quit being tormented by your past, because he has a purpose in that for you. Maybe you've had Sarah moments like I have. Maybe you feel like God is telling you today, like, it's time for you to break down those walls of that past, because you've literally, everything that's gone on in your life, you've taken a brick and you've built these walls around yourself, right? And you've allowed the depression and the anxiety and the abuse and the divorce and the loss of your job and your financial stress and all of these things to torment you. But even in Hebrews 11:11, it says, by faith, even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, received power to conceive offspring, even though she was past the age, since she considered that the one who had promised was faithful. Can I tell you that you just have to consider God faithful? Can we just consider God faithful, and he will give you the power to produce seed within your life? Can we normalize the fact that my faith and your faith don't look the same? Can we normalize the fact that your story is not my story? Can we normalize the fact that we can each add to one another's lives through our stories and our pains and our transformations? Can we normalize the fact that we can share our story without the fear of judgment? Can we normalize the fact that maybe we're like Sarah and we have these laughing moments at God because he's trying to bruise something so impossible in our lives that we can't see it as possible, even though we may want to? God is saying today to test him as faithful. Test him, because we can read his word and know that in all of these stories, it didn't look normal. It didn't look possible. It didn't look like everybody else's story. We know that everybody in the Bible had different stories. They had different paths. They had different faiths, right? I mean, we know that Sarah, we can see that she laughed at God, so we know that she had little faith. But she considered the one who had promised, right? So we know that God will give us strength in those moments when we feel as if something is impossible, right? He will give us the strength to produce the seed that we may consider him faithful in that promise. There's been so many instances in my life where I say, God, that's impossible. In January, I was saying that this podcast was impossible because I was so fearful of it. There was a time that, I would go to a car lot and it took me 4 days to get a car because my credit wouldn't hold it. but I walk into a dealership and buy the vehicle off the lot that I picked out. But before I got to that dealership, I told my husband, we're just going to look. Even when they came back with the approval, I was like, I tried to talk myself out of it. Because to me, that was impossible. Maybe you're going through a depression. Maybe you're going through anxiety. Maybe you're trying to fight through a breakup or a divorce, or maybe you've lost your job, or maybe you feel something on the inside that there's something so much greater for you out there, but you're just a little fearful, and you're a little reluctant to move forward with that because it looks impossible. But God is saying today, he's breaking down those walls. It's time for you to stop allowing your past to torment you, because I need you to step into what I have for you. It looks impossible. It looks hard, but he says, I'm going to give you the power to conceive a seed in your life. He is going to give you the power to conceive that thing in your life you consider to be impossible. Because we see that Sarah was a woman of little faith. I mean, when God very clearly said something to you and you laugh, as I did, but then God produces the promise, right? He produced a promise in a woman standing in prison who laughed at him. And then when he did produce the promise, I tried to fight against it because I was like, there's no way. Like, this is not happening, right? But God grew that, right? He gave me the power to conceive the very seed that he had promised me when I was sitting in prison at count time. When I was in prison, he also made me a mentor. I was not mentor material. I'm going to tell you that. And I fought with my counselor. I'm not doing this. Like, I am not doing this. Like, there's 300 women in this dorm here that you're asking me to be one of the 10 people to mentor these people, to hold these people accountable. You are crazy. Like, I'm not doing this. And she said, yes, you are. And that was a moment that God was again trying to produce something in my life, even though I didn't have the faith to believe that I could do that. Right? I didn't have the faith to believe that I could go downtown and bring a message to homeless people, even though I was in their same shoes. But he produced that seed in my life, even though I had little faith to know that I could do it. But this is what it looked like. It wasn't something that we planned, right? Me and my husband didn't say, okay, well, on this Sunday, on the 3rd, you're gonna bring a message. It didn't work like that. It was a nudge from God that very morning of, that I would literally have to call my husband and say, all right, God says I have to bring the word today. And I had to be faithful in those moments, even though I felt so insecure and so unqualified to do that. But God says you are qualified. And then he brings me into a business where I present a couple of times a week to sometimes 50 to 100 people. And then he brings me to a stage where I tell my story in front of 40,000 people. And then he brings me to a stage where I'm talking to women at a shelter, for a battered women's shelter, right? Then he brings me to a podcast. Then he brings me to Clubhouse, where somebody prophesies over my life and tells me I'm going to be a pastor. All of these things look impossible to me. But God says, I will give you the strength to conceive the seed in which I have spoken over your life. The promise that I have, but you have got to stop allowing your past to torment you. Because I am declaring today that those things are being broken off of you. That depression does not no longer exist. The anxiety no longer exists. That addiction is being broken off of you. That divorce is no longer going to affect you, because God is saying that's the one you chose. But the one I chose is still there for you. The one I chose is still waiting for you. I laughed at my husband. My husband and I were laughing because we were sitting with one of our daughter-in-laws having lunch yesterday. And we were talking about our old job, right? And that he was on the job for 15 years. And I said, wow, you know, you sat at that job for 10 years waiting on me. And that was the reality, right? Because if he wouldn't have been there and I wouldn't have been there, then we would have never met. It was just God producing something that neither one of us knew about. I mean, I've never asked him the question if God said, oh yeah, I'm going to bring you your wife to this job. Like, I've never asked him that question, but God had told me in prison I was going to meet a pastor, but I didn't know how that was going to happen. But God says, I am trying to break down the walls that you have built for yourself and you have allowed your past to torment you, because I have some seeds over your life that I am trying to get you to conceive and produce. But I need you to know that I will give you the strength, even though your faith is not where it needs to be, but I will, and it doesn't look like it should, and it doesn't look like something normal, and people may laugh at you and talk about you. People may judge you. People may do all of these things, but he says, I will give you the strength to conceive the seed in which I have placed over your life. Because this is my promise to you. This is not somebody else's promise to you. This is God's promise to you. And I don't know why my podcasts get longer and longer every day. I'm so sorry. But this is what I want to tell you, and I'm going to let you go. Even though your faith does not look like somebody else's, even though you feel like you're wavering, or you feel like you're failing, or you feel like, you know, you're not strong enough to walk this walk, you're not powerful enough to walk this walk, you're not qualified enough to walk this walk, let me tell you something. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And you're called for such a time as this. You're called even though your faith is not where it needs to be. You're called even though you're weary and you feel like, you know, you can't go any farther. He's calling you out of some things so he can call you into something else. Even though you're too old, you feel like you're too old to conceive, God says, I am going to produce a seed in you even though it looks impossible. Speaking did not seem possible. People are terrified of public speaking. I'm like, hey, here I am, girl. I'm ready. I can go and speak in front of people, but getting on a Facebook Live is nerve-wracking to me. But people will talk about they're terrified of public speaking, but God gave me that gift. But yes, he's growing that gift. And even though I see that it was impossible, I'm like, there is no way I'm going to be a public speaker that people are going to know who I am, right? But he says you have to celebrate the small beginnings. You have to celebrate the fact that I am growing you. See, I am producing a seed in you, but I have to cover you, right? Because when you plant a seed in something, it starts out in the darkness. If you can look inside in your life, and you can see that a lot of the growth and a lot of the seeds that were planted was done in the dark, right? And then there's a season of where he has to cover you, right? There's a season of where he has to cover you, because if he doesn't cover you, you're going to ruin the seed, right? So he's got to cover you until you break ground, right? And when you break ground, you're going to feel the movement, right? You're going to feel it, but yet you're still so small and you're so weak in your faith and in your walk with God. But he's like, I'm still covering you, right? But I'm going to let a little storm come, right? Because I need that wind, right? I need that wind to hit you, because we know when wind hit plants, it makes them stronger, right? It makes them stronger. It makes them to where they can endure more, right? So as you grow from that seed that he has planted in your life, and as you grow and grow and grow, God is going to begin to show you that the things that you once thought were impossible are possible. Because he says, I'm planting a seed in you and I will give you the strength to conceive this offspring, even though it looks impossible to you. So today, I just want you to know that even though it looks impossible, even though your faith is not where it needs to be, know that he is going to give you the power to conceive. But he's saying that you've got to let go of the torment of the past, because I need you to open up your eyes to something a little bit different, right? You laughed at me, but here I am trying to produce that seed in your life. And I need you to open up your eyes to what I'm trying to do, because I've already given you scenarios in your life where I've qualified you in so many different ways to show you that this is what I have for you. But yet you're so consumed with so many things. You're so consumed with the guilt. You're so consumed with the depression and the anxiety and the doubt and the fearfulness and the fear of judgment, that he's saying, listen, listen, listen. I am trying to produce a seed in you, and I'm giving you the strength to do it. I know that when I am done, you will consider the one who promised as faithful. So try God on for yourself. He's not saying you have to come to him in being perfect. He's not saying that you have to come to him with this giant faith. He's saying, just come to me and I will give you the strength to produce the seed within your life. So today, I'm just telling you that you don't have to be perfect. Your walk with God is never going to be perfect, okay? Because we all fall short every single day. But give him a shot. Give him a shot. Give the faith a shot, because he's going to produce a seed in you, even though you think it's an impossible situation. But you've got to allow him to plant the seed in you so that he can grow that seed to something beautiful. So today, I just want to encourage you to try it on for yourself. Maybe you're like me and Sarah and you've laughed at God a couple of times, but that very thing that you laughed about is the very seed that he's trying to produce within you. So allow God to produce that seed, because he's saying, go ahead, put me on trial. Put me on trial. Just try me if you want to. That's what he's saying to you. Because once he produces that seed, you will consider the one who promised was faithful. So today, allow God to plant that seed. Have just the little mustard seed of faith to know that even though you think that this stuff looks impossible, to God, all things is possible. So today, just go out in faith. Read Hebrews 11. Because it's by faith, by faith, by faith, and start walking in that and saying, God, by faith, I know that I am going to have this. God, even though my faith is not where it needs to be, but by faith, I am going to be successful. By faith, I am no longer going to suffer depression. By faith, I know that this anxiety is going to be broken off of me. By faith, I know that I am going to walk in the purpose that you have planned for me. So today, start speaking by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith, and try God on for yourself. And thank you so much for joining me. And I hope that I added some value. And I hope you have an absolutely amazing day. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.